I never imagined a toy with four little propellers could expose the ugliest side of a neighborhood. But that's exactly what happened. And looking back now, I don't think this story was ever really about drones. It was about power, about people who believe rules are meant for everyone else until those same rules inconvenience them. My name's Ethan Brooks, and a few years ago, my wife, Claire, and I moved into a quiet townhouse community called Copper Ridge Commons just outside Henderson, Nevada. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, peaceful, full of young families, retirees, and the kind of people who waved when they walked their dogs in the evening. Every Saturday morning, I'd grab a cup of coffee, pull my little drone out of the garage, and spend 20 minutes flying over the neighborhood. I wasn't spying on anybody, honestly. I mostly filmed sunsets reflecting off the red tile roofs, checked for loose shingles after windstorms, and sometimes helped neighbors inspect places they couldn't safely reach without climbing a ladder. My 12-year-old son, Mason, loved sitting beside me with the controller, pretending he was directing a Hollywood movie while my daughter Emma laughed every time the drone landed crooked in the grass. It became our little weekend ritual. Nothing dramatic, nothing controversial. Just another harmless hobby. That's why the email caught everyone completely off guard. It arrived late on a Friday afternoon, right when people were getting off work, and the subject line read, "Immediate Community Safety Update." I opened it expecting something about parking or landscaping, but instead it announced that all recreational drone flights were prohibited, effective immediately. Violations would result in fines of up to $500 per incident, and there would be absolutely no exceptions. No explanation, no discussion, no community vote. Just a signature from HOA President Linda Mercer at the bottom like she'd settled the matter all by herself. Claire looked over my shoulder and shrugged. "Well, I guess that's the end of your little flying career." I laughed and said, "If everybody has to follow it, I can live with that." I wasn't happy, but I'd lived under HOA rules long enough to know some battles weren't worth fighting. The next morning felt strangely quiet. Normally, I'd hear at least 3 or 4 drones buzzing somewhere around the neighborhood. Kids learning to fly, dads filming backyard projects, one retired engineer who loved photographing desert birds from above. Instead, there was nothing except sprinklers clicking across tiny front lawns and the occasional lawnmower humming in the distance. It was almost eerie. 2 weeks passed before something ruined that illusion completely. I was washing my truck early Saturday morning when I heard the unmistakable sound of propellers overhead. At first, I smiled without thinking because the noise had become familiar over the years. Then I remembered the ban and looked up. There it was. A sleek charcoal gray drone gliding slowly above the northern section of Copper Ridge, making smooth circles over the larger homes near the walking trail. It wasn't flying randomly either. Whoever controlled it knew exactly where they were going, pausing over driveways, backyards, swimming pools, then moving to the next property with almost military precision. I stood there with the hose still running while water pooled around my shoes. "Claire," I called toward the garage, "come here for a second." She walked outside, followed my finger into the sky, and frowned. "I thought drones were banned." "Apparently not all of them," I muttered. The same thing happened again the following Saturday. Same drone, same flight path, same time of morning. Then it happened again the week after that. By then, several neighbors had started talking. Mrs. Alvarez across the street joked that maybe the HOA had hired the FBI. My friend Derek laughed and said maybe somebody just never read the email, but none of us actually believed that. Whoever flew this thing wasn't worried about getting caught because they weren't hiding. They were practically putting on a show. So when the monthly HOA meeting rolled around, I decided to ask the simplest question imaginable. I stood up, waited for the room to quiet down, and said, "If recreational drones are banned, why has one been flying over the north side of the neighborhood every Saturday morning for the last 3 weeks?" Linda didn't even hesitate. She smiled the kind of practice smile politicians use when they're convinced they've already won the room and replied, "Those flights have been authorized for community marketing purposes." That was it. No details, no explanation, just 5 words meant to end the conversation. A few people nodded like that somehow made perfect sense, but something about the way she answered bothered me more than the drone itself. It wasn't confidence, it was comfort. The comfort of someone who assumed nobody would dare ask a second question. Unfortunately for her, I've never been very good at leaving loose ends alone. And as I sat back down that evening with everyone else moving on to landscaping budgets and pool maintenance, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just stumbled onto something much bigger than a flying camera. I kept telling myself I was probably overthinking it, but every time that drone floated over the same row of homes, my gut kept saying the same thing. If this really was a legitimate exception, why was everyone acting like it was some secret? Monday morning before work, I sent a polite email to the HOA management company asking for a copy of the written exemption policy, the board vote approving it, and any guidelines explaining how homeowners could apply for similar permission. I wasn't trying to start a fight. Honestly, if they had replied with a clear policy that applied equally to everyone, I would have shrugged and moved on with my life. 2 days later, I received a single attachment, the exact same drone ban notice every homeowner had already received. No exemption policy, no meeting minutes, no explanation, just the original notice. I stared at my computer screen and actually laughed because it was such a lazy response. Claire walked past my office carrying a basket of laundry and asked, "Is that all they sent?" I spun the monitor toward her. She looked at it for about 3 seconds before saying, "Either somebody doesn't know what they're doing, or somebody hopes you'll stop asking questions." That sentence stuck with me all afternoon. The next evening, I knocked on Derek's door. He had lived in Copper Ridge almost 10 years and knew practically everyone. We sat on his patio while his golden retriever chased tennis balls around the yard, and I asked if he'd ever heard of special drone permissions. He shook his head. "Nope, but I know who owns that drone." I looked up. "You do?" He nodded toward the northern section of the neighborhood. "Belongs to Kevin Holloway, vice president of the HOA board." That surprised me, but not nearly as much as what Derek said next. He's also one of the biggest real estate agents in Henderson. Every luxury listing he gets has aerial photos. Suddenly, all those slow circles over expensive homes made perfect sense. Those weren't recreational flights at all. They were business flights. Except the rule didn't say recreational drones were banned unless you happened to be selling houses. The more I thought about it, the worse it smelled. Instead of arguing at the next meeting, I decided to do something much quieter. Nevada law gave homeowners the right to inspect certain association records, including board decisions and meeting minutes. So I filed a formal written records request through certified mail. I requested every document related to the drone ban, every vote associated with it, every communication authorizing exceptions, and every enforcement record involving drone complaints over the previous 6 months. The management company suddenly became much friendlier after that. Apparently, a certified letter quoting state statutes gets more attention than a polite email. 10 business days later, a thick envelope showed up in my mailbox. I made coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and started reading. About 20 minutes in, I stopped turning pages altogether. "Claire," I called quietly. She came into the kitchen, saw my face, and immediately asked, "What did you find?" I slid one document across the table. It was an email chain between Linda and Kevin discussing temporary marketing authorization for drone flights supporting Kevin's real estate listings. No board vote, no homeowner notice, just the two of them approving it privately. Claire read the last paragraph twice before looking back at me. "Wait, they banned everyone else, then gave themselves permission? Looks that way." But it got even worse. Buried deeper in the packet were 2 denied requests submitted by other homeowners only days after the ban took effect. One belonged to a retired roofing contractor who wanted to inspect storm damage without climbing onto his roof after knee surgery. Denied. The second came from a father hoping to record his daughter's middle school science project using a drone in the community park for 15 minutes on a Sunday morning. Denied. The explanation on both forms was almost identical. Community policy prohibits recreational drone activity without exception. I leaned back in my chair and felt something shift inside me. Up until that moment, I had been irritated. Now I was angry. Not because I missed flying my own drone, but because they'd looked those people in the eye and told them there were absolutely no exceptions while quietly creating one for themselves behind closed doors. That's the kind of thing that destroys trust. I spent the next several evenings organizing every document into labeled folders. Derek helped me build a timeline. Mrs. Alvarez highlighted inconsistencies between emails. Another neighbor named Sharon, who had worked as a paralegal for years, pointed out several procedural violations in the meeting records. Before long, our little investigation had turned into something much bigger than one homeowner asking inconvenient questions. We weren't gossiping anymore. We were documenting everything. The funniest part was watching how quickly word spread without anyone raising their voice. I'd hand one neighbor a copy of an email. They'd show another neighbor, and by the weekend, people who had never spoken to each other before were comparing paperwork over coffee in their driveways. The drone wasn't even the main topic anymore. People started bringing up other issues: selective parking enforcement, landscaping fines that mysteriously disappeared for board members, architectural requests approved for friends but denied for everyone else. It was like pulling one loose thread and watching half the sweater unravel. Linda must have realized something was happening because she suddenly sent another community email reminding everyone to remain respectful and avoid spreading misinformation. That message backfired spectacularly. Derek called me laughing so hard he could barely finish his sentence. "Congratulations," he said. "You officially scared them." The night of the next HOA meeting, I'd never seen the clubhouse parking lot so full. Usually maybe 15 homeowners showed up. That evening, there were over 50. Couples stood along the back wall because every chair had been taken. Linda opened the meeting with her usual smile, but it faded the second she looked around the room and realized nearly everyone was carrying folders, envelopes, or printed emails. Kevin avoided eye contact completely. After the routine financial reports ended, Linda asked if there were any homeowner comments. Before she could point at anyone, I stood up holding the packet she'd unknowingly mailed to me herself. "I'd like to discuss the drone policy," I said calmly. She sighed. "Mr. Parting, Brooks, I believe we've already addressed that issue." "Actually," I replied, placing the documents on the front table one page at a time, "I don't think we have." The room became so quiet you could hear the air conditioner cycling on above us. I held up the email authorizing Kevin's private flights. "Can you explain why homeowners were told there would be no exceptions while this authorization was issued privately?" Linda glanced toward Kevin. Kevin stared down at the table. Nobody answered. So I continued. I held up the denied application from the retired roofer. This homeowner was recovering from surgery and wanted to inspect storm damage. Then I raised the science project request. This family wanted 15 minutes for their daughter's school assignment. I laid both beside Kevin's authorization letter. "Can someone explain the difference?" A man near the back finally muttered. "Looks like the difference is who sits on the board." That broke the silence. Suddenly, people started speaking over one another. "Why wasn't this voted on? Who approved this? How many other exceptions are there?" Linda tried to regain control by tapping her gavel. "Please, everyone calm down. This was simply a temporary business arrangement." Sharon immediately stood up. "Then why do your written denials saying no exceptions exist?" Linda opened her mouth, then closed it again. Kevin finally spoke for the first time all evening. "The aerial photography benefits property values." Derek couldn't help himself. "Funny. Apparently roof inspections and science projects don't." A few people laughed. Kevin didn't. I looked around the room and realized this wasn't really about winning anymore. The homeowners had already reached the same conclusion without me saying another word. All I had done was place the truth where everyone could finally see it. And once people see favoritism in black and white, it's almost impossible to convince them they imagined it. The atmosphere in that clubhouse had changed forever. And as Linda nervously shuffled through her notes, searching for something that could somehow put the lid back on the conversation, I quietly raised my hand one more time, because I knew exactly what motion I was about to make. And I also knew it was going to change this neighborhood long after the drone itself disappeared from the sky. I waited until the room settled down again before speaking, not because I was nervous anymore, but because I wanted everyone to hear every single word. I'd like to make a motion, I said, looking around the clubhouse instead of at Linda or Kevin. First, revoke every undocumented exemption related to drone flights effective immediately. Second, require every future exception to be approved by a public board vote and included in the meeting minutes. Third, rewrite the policy so the same standards apply to every homeowner, including every board member. For a couple of seconds, nobody said anything. Then Mrs. Alvarez raised her hand. I'll second that. It was almost poetic. 2 weeks earlier, she had been joking about the mystery drone, and now she was helping rewrite the rules that had exposed the entire mess. Linda cleared her throat and tried one last time to regain control. I think everyone is overreacting. This was simply intended to promote home sales, which ultimately benefits the community. Before I could respond, an older gentleman named Frank stood up from the third row. Frank almost never spoke during meetings. In fact, I'd lived there nearly 4 years and had probably heard him say fewer than 20 words. He looked directly at Linda and quietly said, "No. Selling houses benefits the agent selling the house. Trust benefits the community." You could have heard a pin drop after that. Even Linda seemed to realize there wasn't a speech in the world that could erase what everyone had already read with their own eyes. The vote happened a few minutes later. 38 homeowners were eligible to vote that evening. 35 voted in favor of the motion. 2 voted against it. 1 abstained. Kevin didn't say another word. He simply gathered his folder, avoided every pair of eyes in the room, and walked out before the meeting officially ended. Linda remained seated, staring down at the stack of papers in front of her as though they had somehow betrayed her, when in reality they had only documented choices she'd made herself. Walking out into the warm desert night, I remember taking a deep breath that felt strangely different from every breath I'd taken over the previous month. It wasn't victory I felt. It was relief. Relief that I hadn't ignored the little voice telling me something wasn't right. Relief that ordinary neighbors who barely knew one another had chosen honesty over convenience. Most of all, relief that my kids would grow up seeing that standing up for fairness doesn't always require shouting. Sometimes it just requires refusing to stop asking reasonable questions. Over the next several weeks, the board hired an attorney to help rewrite the policy. Every exception now required a recorded vote, written justification, and equal access for every homeowner willing to meet the same standards. The updated rules were filed with the county and distributed to the entire neighborhood. Ironically, once the policy became fair, almost nobody cared about flying drones anymore. The controversy had never been about the drones in the first place. Kevin quietly stopped using aerial footage in his listings around our neighborhood, whether that was his decision or his brokerage's. I never found out. A few months later, he resigned from the board, citing personal commitments. Linda finished out her term, but never quite regained the confidence she once carried into every meeting. People had started asking more questions about budgets, contracts, landscaping bids, and reserve funds. Transparency has a funny way of becoming contagious once a community realizes it actually has the right to demand it. Every now and then Mason still asks if I miss flying my old drone over Copper Ridge. I always smile because the honest answer surprises even me. Not really, I tell him. I miss believing everybody was playing by the same rules. That's the part that disappeared for a while. Not the drone, not the hobby, but the assumption that fairness happened automatically. It doesn't. Somebody usually has to protect it, even when the issue seems too small to matter. Looking back now, the drone ban became one of the best things that ever happened to our neighborhood, because it exposed a much larger problem before that problem had years to grow in the dark. Sometimes corruption doesn't arrive wearing a mask or stealing millions of dollars. Sometimes it shows up disguised as a harmless little exception that nobody thinks is worth questioning. And maybe that's the real lesson I carried away from all of this. The moment leaders believe rules exist to protect themselves instead of treating everyone equally, those rules stop being leadership and start becoming privilege. I still drive through Copper Ridge once in a while, and on quiet Saturday mornings the sky looks exactly the way it did before any of this happened. Calm, blue, and almost perfectly still. Most people passing through would never guess a tiny drone once turned that peaceful neighborhood upside down. But I know. Every rooftop, every sidewalk, every clubhouse window reminds me that communities aren't held together by bylaws or fences or board meetings. They're held together by trust. And trust is incredibly difficult to rebuild once people realize it has been traded away for someone's personal advantage. So now I'd love to hear what you think. If you had been sitting in that HOA meeting, would you have considered Kevin's special permission harmless because it helped sell homes? Or would you have voted to end the exception like we did? Where do you think the line is between practical leadership and favoritism? Share your thoughts in the comments because I read every one of them. And stories like this always spark some of the most interesting conversations. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share with someone who's ever dealt with an HOA or a neighborhood rule that just didn't seem fair. You never know, your experience might be the next story we tell.